I'm with the insurance company, Security First Insurance, and what I'm going to do today is talk about our experience, how we put together what others view as a culture of innovation and change. Since most of you are in the auto business or auto auctions business, I'd like to just start off with give you a brief description of who our insurance company is and what we do. Security First Insurance writes homeowner business and only homeowner business in the state of Florida and only in the state of Florida. So we're a very focused specialty company. We were established in 2005. We're a 10-year-old company, fairly new. We are growing rapidly. One of the things that's interesting about our company in terms of the 7 companies that are going to survive that Don just mentioned is that 60% of our business is actually done in partnership with some of those companies. Allstate, Geico, USAA, Esurance, Florida Farm Bureau. So those companies, there was a speaker that talked about, that was Bob Hardwick, talked about the desirability for the large writers to write in certain states and not in others. Well, in Florida is a case in point. A lot of the large companies have said we don't want to write homeowners there, so we fill that niche as a partner. From a financial perspective, we have grown each year in our surplus. We're growing rapidly. Our policies in force, we're on a course to double our policies in force in a 2-year span, and we'll be up to about 300,000 policies, customers at the end of the year. We'll do about $300 million worth of business this year. And so we are growing rapidly. We're adding employees, and we're building systems, and we're doing all the things that you would expect a fast-growing company to do. In one of John McNeil's conferences, he had a speaker from Harvard that said, you know, I talk to CEOs all the time, and one of the things I hear is we want to be innovators, we just don't want to be first. Well, if you're an innovator, you want to be first. And we take a lot of pride in some of the firsts that we've had as a company. One of our firsts was to co-develop with Inservio a tool, Contents ITV, the first tool that would help to allow people to establish how much contents coverage they needed without having to do an inventory of every item in their house. Another first we had was we developed with a company in the UK, Integrity, a way to take all of the communication that we didn't know how to manage, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, text, email, and bring them into a system that uses IBM Watson. It reads the communication, knows where it comes from, looks at the content and looks at the context, and directs it to our organization. So our entire organization, all of our customer service, all of our underwriters, all of our claims people are clued in and are synced in with all the social media and all electronic communication and text. This allows our entire organization to respond just as we would in any other communication. Very important to us because these types of communication in a natural disaster, where we're going to have a flood of people reaching out to us, would overwhelm our organization if we didn't have a way to do that. So that was the first we were very proud of. We, as far as we know, we're the first insurance company to give our policyholders an email that links them to a video that actually is personalized and will tell them what their coverages are in their policy, some of the exclusions, and some important things to know. We've had tremendous success with this. We're one of the first companies in Florida to have an instant quote online, because people in Florida get a little anxious when they come home in the evening and they find out that they were canceled or non-renewed by their homeowner's insurance. So we felt that we should have something online, so if they search for homeowner's insurance, they could find out if we were open and what a price was. And we were one of the first companies, we were the first homeowner company to have an iPhone. When our iPhone app hit the store in 2009, there were only 4 other companies that came up in the App Store under insurance, and those were very large companies. So we've done a lot of firsts. We're proud of it. We want to be first. Some of those things have won us some awards. Awards are good for us because our people like them. They make us proud that we're achieving things, and they're evidence of people recognizing that some of the things we are doing are important. We're very proud for the SMC4 social media platform. We won a global award from IBM in 2013. I got a couple awards in 2014 that were really a byproduct of the things we're doing as a company, the elite. And then this year we won the Celent Model Insurer Award, and this was based on the personalized video, that policyholder video that we had. And then the one we're probably most proud of that was a new one for this year is that our employees responded and verified that we're a great place to work, Florida Trend Magazine. So that's a little bit about Security First. This has been a journey for me, moving from doing to understanding and doing. And another way to look at it is the age-old quadrant about being a conscious competent or an unconscious competent. And hopefully this journey has been moving from an unconscious competent to a conscious competent, or at least that's where I'm going to believe. And it started because John McNeil called me in the beginning of 2014. And he said, my conference is going great, people love it, but some of the feedback I'm getting is, you're bringing all these great people in, what about innovation in insurance? So he said, would you speak at the conference? And I said, okay. And so he said, we'll do a 45-minute thing where we'll just talk back and forth. So that began a process of, what are we going to talk about? How am I going to explain it? And he asked certain questions and we prepared. The good part is that started me thinking about, how do I explain what it is we're doing and why we're doing what we're doing and how it's working? The bad thing, not the bad thing, but the surprise was John threw a ringer in at the end and asked me some personal questions that I didn't know he was going to ask. And that started me thinking about the other end of, as an individual and being a leader and wanting to do innovation, what does that mean to me and what do I have to do as a leader? Those two things really kick-started my thinking. But at the end of it, I was done until I ran into this guy at the bar, imagine that. And Don says, hey, would you speak at my conference? And I was like, well, I'm really not a speaker. I work for an insurance company, but you know, sometimes when life throws you a challenge, you go ahead and say it. So I said, sure. He said, well, give me your business card. I'll invite you to Santa Barbara so you can see what we're all about, and then you can speak at Sea Island. So I said, great. So 2 months later, I get an invitation to Santa Barbara. It's like, are you serious? Uh-oh. So now I'm starting to think, I'm going to have to give a talk. What am I going to talk about? Well, the next thing that happened in this journey was I was traveling, and our vice president of marketing sends me an email and says, 3 of us got together, we got this great book, and we have just bought copies for the entire management team. Well, I try not to be too controlling, but my first thought was, okay, what did we just sanction? I never heard of this book. So I get back, walk into her office and sit down. I said, Marissa, so do I get a copy of this book? She says, well, why would you want that? Because you sent it to everybody, I want to read it. And she says, well, actually you don't need to read it. And I said, well, why is that? And she says, because you already know what's in it. She says, the reason we bought the copies is this book explains to the rest of us why you're doing and saying the things you're doing. I said, well, now I got to read it. So I read the book, and it did. It actually said a lot of the things we were doing, but it explained it so that you could actually explain it to someone else. And that's when I realized it's not good enough, it wasn't good enough for us as leaders to know what to do. We had to understand why we were doing it, and then we had to be able to explain it to our folks so they would be on board and that they could explain it to each other. So part of this journey then is really about trying to figure out how to do all that. And so I'm very grateful to Don for the opportunity, because it forced me to do something that I would not have taken the time to do otherwise. So when we talk about innovation, I don't know about you, but innovation is everywhere. Everybody's talking about innovation. And it's a lot more than it was 5 years ago. And why is that? Well, in the insurance space, I've heard V.J. Dowling, I've heard Mr. Sullivan, Brian Sullivan will be talking this afternoon. Both actually 2 years ago at a conference say that the pace of change in insurance in the next 5 years is going to look like we're standing still in the past 20 years. Well, for both of these guys to say that, they're very knowledgeable, tells you something about the way things are moving. And I think, you've got concentric. You've got the world is changing, the industry is changing, our company is changing. We all know it's changing. What we don't exactly know is where it's going. And we're all feeling the pace of that change. If you're in the insurance business, you're working through agents. Agents are trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean for the agency system? I mean, when I started in this business in late 70s, early 80s, if you asked somebody, how do I get an auto or homeowner policy, there was only one way. You went to an agent, whether it was a captive agent or not. There was no computers that would allow you instant ratings so that you could call and get insurance over the phone. So an agent was essential in 1980. Today, an agent is an option. People know they can pick up the phone 24/7. They can get insurance, or they can go on the web and get insurance. So agents are looking at the pace of change, saying, what's my future? Insurance companies. You look at your competitor does something, you go, wow, I didn't know you could do that. We got to do more of that stuff. How do we do that? Reinsurance, the whole reinsurance space, with mergers and consolidation, new capital, the ILS market. There's a ton of things going on. If you're in the reinsurance business, you're a little bit concerned about the pace of change and where it's going. And then us as individuals, like I said, taking a look at where we are. I mean, we're all looking questions. Is the job am doing, is that going to be relevant to the time that I'm going to retire? Am I with the right company? Am I with a company that's innovative, that's going to be one of the survivors? Or am I with a company that may not make it? And how does that relate to my responsibilities for my career and my family? So we've got all this change. And then it's fueled. We got the press pounding us. We either innovate or die. I love this. I'm getting a new email from the Insurance Innovation Reporter. Thought that was a good one. Some people would think that's an oxymoron. Like this guy here from Carlin Ventures. Tech firms should focus on the antiquated insurance sector. We're ripe for disruption, and we need to be dragged into the 21st century. This guy doesn't have a very high opinion of the insurance industry. I don't think he's very knowledgeable either. And then you've got the consultants, PricewaterhouseCoopers. If we don't adapt, we will lose our leading positions to new entrants and new business models. So we've got everybody telling us the world is ending, but they don't know where it's going. And I think there are three overall reactions that companies and individuals have to this change. First one is fear. And fear is so dangerous because it really closes out, closes out open exchange, and it manifests itself in many ways. Many people that are blockers don't appear to be blocking from a position of fear, but if you dig down deep, the people that don't want to make change, that don't want to analyze things, there's fear. The second one is in the middle, it's hope. And this is characterized, I think, by, we've been in business for 150 years, we're a good company, we treat our customers well, we'll just keep doing the same things and make some little changes and then we'll be fine. And that's not really a strategy today that I'd be comfortable with. And the third one is faith. Faith that you can build an organization, that you have the type of people, that you can learn fast enough, that you can build an organization that will be in a position to understand what's happening and to be able to cope and adjust on the fly. And so at Security First, we have that faith that if we build that organization, that capability, that we strive for disruption. If we're not intimidated, we should celebrate the innovation and learn from it. And I would say this, if there's going to be disruption, we want to do the disrupting. So innovation is critical. Everybody's talking about it. We know why. We need to move forward. So it should be easy to define. And I've seen more than a few presentations defining innovation, and I've seen a bunch of descriptions. The fact that it's defined in so many ways, it doesn't deter the consultants. So we got KPMG did this survey, 280 insurance companies, and they're saying almost half admitted that they had no formal innovation strategy. What is a formal innovation strategy? I don't know, because 55% had one. And I think that the formal innovation strategies I've seen, my apologies if in your organizations you're doing this, is a chief innovation officer or an innovation department. I don't think that those are going to change an organization and to change a culture. I think that they are a failure of leadership, and I think that they send a message to the people in the company that you want to be innovative, but you also want to protect the status quo. So I think you can get some good ideas, but if you're really trying to transform your culture, I think that's a crazy idea. We were at the Celent award ceremony to pick up the award we got for the personalized video. And at this award ceremony, there were a number of companies that were nominated and got awards in various categories. The interesting thing was each one presented sort of short description of why they were nominated or why they won the award. The striking thing about the presentations was the overwhelming majority of them did not transform their industry. They did not transform their company. Their innovation was in a culture that can't do anything, they got something done, which is nice, but it's hardly innovation, and it's hardly going to be enough to make sure that your company survives and thrives. So innovation isn't something that's easily described. I think when we're talking about innovation, it's an adjective. We're talking about change that's innovative, and to existing products, to existing processes, and we're talking about firms that are innovative in ways to do things differently that enables innovative change. So we're not talking about innovation as a thing, we're talking about change as a thing, and innovation as the type of change that we're looking for. So how do you create innovative change? Well, there's one way to do it, and this is the blind squirrel method, is that occasionally a blind squirrel will find an acorn. And in fact, there was an article in the New York Times today about how Play-Doh was invented. So it was a very serendipitous discovery, and it changed a company that was almost going to go out of business making cleaning supplies to having a huge product. This is great, but it's not a plan. What we want is a plan to have a sustainable competitive advantage through innovation. Innovations themselves are rarely sustainable competitive advantages. What you want is to build a culture that can continue to innovate, continue to on their processes and on their products. And so that's what we want to create. Allegedly, Walt Disney said, we can innovate faster than they can imitate. I went all over Google, I should have tried Yahoo, and I could not find this attributed to him. But part of it is that you want to keep innovating faster, that you're thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead of your competitors while they're trying to address the latest thing you do. You're actually planning on implementing number 2 and working out number 3, so that they're never going to catch up. So how do you create this culture? I gave it a lot of thought, and I think there are 3 things that are essential if you want a company in an organization that does this. First of all, you need clear business objectives, and we'll talk about what type of clear business objectives. You also need a process for taking the ideas and the methods for getting to those business objectives, to get them into production, to test them and do them. You need a process for implementing those changes, and then you need effective leadership. As far as clear business objectives, Jim Collins in his Built to Last talked about the BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goals. And it's my belief that we don't try to innovate. What we do is we set business objectives that are high enough and lofty enough that the only way we can get to those objectives is to do something different, to use a process, a technology, something that we don't currently have in our bag of tricks, because that's the only way to get to those goals. And so I think the BHAG, in terms of Jim Collins, or an objective that you cannot get to without doing something different, is absolutely essential. In 2008, when we were a young company, we were just in business, we had to start by copying a competitor's filing, their rates, their forms, their rules, and we took a system that was somewhat dated, and we were very, very difficult to do business with. agents would tell us, we don't want to do business with you. So we decided that the number one thing we had to do was if we were going to survive and prosper, we had to be so easy to do business with that agents couldn't even ignore us. It wasn't just we wanted to be easy to do business with, because at the same time, we're going to not pay the highest commission, and so we had to be the easiest to do business with. So in order to do that, we tore down our manuals, every underwriting rule. We said, we've been underwriting like this for years. Is this a rule? What do we do with this? When people say yes to this question, what happens? Okay, so we looked at every piece of information, every underwriting rule, and said they are all friction. They are all preventing the agent from getting to the end where they get the commission. So there's a cost benefit for each of those pieces of information. We built a brand new web portal, what we call quote to issue website for the agents to quote and bind business, starting from how quickly could they get a quote. It was taking them 25 minutes on our old system. We brought that down to 3 minutes. How quickly could they issue a policy? They could issue a policy in 5 to 6 minutes now. So we made significant organizational changes. We said, as long as I've been in the business, agents say, I want to talk to an underwriter. Well, most companies will put customer service people in front of them. The agent calls in with a problem. They have to persuade the customer service person that their issue is important enough to be granted access to an underwriter. So we said, well, if the agents want to talk to underwriters, why don't we just have them talk to underwriters? So we put underwriters in our call center. We have no customer service people. But at the same time, agents do another thing. They will call underwriters till they get the answer they want. So we said we're going to have to be consistent. That led us to develop an internal wiki. So all of our underwriters can just type a couple letters and it starts to go through, and all of our rules are maintained in this internal Wikipedia, so they're all using the same basic knowledge and underwriting rules, so they get consistency of answers. And then the third thing is that the last thing is we did all this, we said, well, if the customer has resistance to the sale because they never heard of us and maybe some of our competitors because the name brands had all left, how do we get a sale? And so we decided that we were going to have to advertise on TV. And we're the first and the only company, a homeowner company in Florida that's consistently advertising on TV. We spend over $1 million a year on TV. And the agents tell us when they get to the sale and they have 2 or 3 quotes, they go, oh yeah, I know those guys, they're on TV. It works. So having that objective that said we have to be the easiest to do business with drove us to look at every single one of our processes if we're going to get there. A couple weeks ago, I went into a series of meetings with our key agents across the state. At the end of each meeting, I'd say, what else can we do to do a better job for you? And it was actually kind of surprising to me because in a number of instances, they said, no, look, you guys are so easy to do business with. You're so far above your competitors. Just keep doing it. It's like, okay. So it's worked for us. An objective can be forward-looking. In that case, it was immediate because that was the challenge that we had right then as a new company out of the box. But and you can have more than one objectives, but one of our driving objectives right now is to create the Amazonian experience for our customers from the quote all the way to the claim, because that's what the next generation is going to expect. So that's driven us to say, well, what else do we have to do? How do we start building? How do we look from the outside in as a customer, and what do we expect to find? And so that drove us immediately to say, okay, we've got to have responsive and adaptive design so that any device, any time will work for any function that we have. Create self-service technology that drove us to the SMC4, which we won the award for, and it's developed our mobile technology. Our new Storm Tracker actually has, our new iPhone app actually has a feature that when there's a storm out there, you can either put your location or your policy location, and it will show you the NOAA storm track and where you are. So you can see if you're in harm's way or not. But not only that, you can actually share that on social media and post it on Facebook. So you can tell your friends and your family in Indiana whether you're close to the storm or not. So trying to figure out ways to be the type of company that a millennial will expect and be an insurance company. Clear business objectives, again, then, they cannot be accomplished with current methods, business processes, or procedures. They've got to be clear, and simple to be understood. And they don't hint at how that objective is to be met, because what you're trying to do is get the entire organization to start thinking about the how. It's all about the how. And it has to have a buy-in across the organization. It just can't be another program from the C-suite. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that. When you're coming up with these objectives, part of what we try to do is look in the future. And there's a theory of management that I got introduced to about 2 years ago that was sort of interesting, and I read it, I said, aha, that's actually a description of this. It's called design theory of management. And what they're saying in the design theory is, in the 20th century, we were concentrating on incremental improvement, improving the processes. But in the 21st century, we're going to actually have to design new processes, new companies, new ways of doing things. So when we look at all these different trends and we try to see what's happening in the world, we say, well, if these trends are playing out, what's liable to happen? If you go out 5 years, what kind of company, what are we going to have to look like if we're going to survive and prosper? And if we start to list the things, the capabilities that we need to have, then we work backwards and say, okay, here's where we are today. If we're going to have some of those capabilities, we got to start to build those in. And so really, we're trying to envision an end state that's uncertain and figure out what we know about that, and then try to work towards that end state and design the future. So when you're looking at your big objectives for the future, it's actually going out and working back in. One of the ways that we work that then is with those clear business objectives, you have a scenario. Okay, and let me take one for example. And we've talked a little about yesterday whether auto premiums are going up or down. But assume for me that in the long run that they're going to go down relative to household income. And if that's the case, does it affect us? After all, we're a homeowners insurance company. Well, one of the things it does affect is distribution. Because if you have a small agent that writes homeowners and auto insurance is paying the bills. And if their income from auto insurance goes down, let's say 20%, they got to write 20% more customers without increasing their costs. Okay, well, they're not going to be able to do that. That's going to be a problem. That's part of our distribution. So we have to say, well, what will happen if that happens? Well, a couple things are happening. One is, in Florida anyway, we're seeing a growth of agencies that have centralized their administrative and the company contracts, and the agents actually just sell, and they don't own the renewals. They have an ownership, contractual ownership in the book. Brightway is one. We insure. There's a couple new ones. I saw a new one the other day. This is a way for an agent to write more business, have more customers without increasing their costs. But the other thing we look at is say, okay, what happens if the small agent can't make it? What does he do? Well, he sells his agency. Who does he sell it to? A bigger agency. What does that agency look like? Okay, and then we take a look at what happens in the UK with the aggregators. And the big agencies have call centers, and they have websites, and it's a different business model. So we say, well, what does that mean for us? And I think what it means for our industry is that distribution is changing. You have to decide whether you're distribution or manufacturing. And I'd submit to you that the big seven, the issue is that they recognize that they have the brand, that people go to Allstate, State Farm, Geico. I mean, Geico had a high homeowner satisfaction rating in J.D. Powers. They don't write homeowners. It was actually a lot higher than the companies that they use to write homeowners. There's the power of brand. So people are going to these brands for insurance. We don't have that distribution. We're a manufacturer. So we have to plan and say, in a future state, if there's big distribution and we're a manufacturer, what's going to make us the best and most attractive manufacturer for those distributors? And that's kind of the way we plan and structure. So as we have that becomes a working hypothesis. That's our theory. And what do we do with that? Well, we talk to our people about that. We constantly talk about, here's what we're doing, here's why, here's what we think is going to happen. It's a working hypothesis because A, as a hypothesis, it's unproven, and B, it's changing because we talk with our partners as Tim Sanders says, we talk to our partners. Here's what we're doing, here's what we're doing it, and here's what we think is going to happen. And then as we talk to our employees, talk to our partners, they say, well, have you factored in this? And you go, we didn't know about that. Okay, then you alter the working hypothesis. But as you do this, and as you do this through your organization and through your meetings and through your partners, everybody comes on board. They have a chance to contribute, they have a chance to understand, and everybody starts to get on the same page. The other thing is that when you say that this is our objective, and you have to mean it. And it doesn't matter how much you mean it, your actions are going to tell the rest of your company, if you're a leader, the actions are going to tell your company how committed you are. And let me give you an example. Early on, the Amazonia experience was a decision that we made that said we are going to spend all our future development effort on the millennials, even though they're not the majority of our customers today, because we got to throw the ball where the receiver is going to be. We're going to stop investing in the shrinking portion of our customers and keep our investment to the growing portion. And as we did that, one of the first things we came up with is we had emails on about 11% of our policies. How are we going to communicate using email and technology if we didn't have email addresses? So we made a decision. We enforced that we aren't going to issue a policy unless we have a valid email. Now our agents thought, some of them said no problem, we have emails, we just don't put it in because it's not required. But we had agents that said, are you kidding me? You mean you're not going to write a beautiful piece of business simply because the owner is 90 and doesn't have an email address? We said yes. We are not spending money and our efforts on a shrinking part of our customer base because our future depends on being prepared for the customer base that's growing. But the message that sends to your team is that you're willing to make the hard decisions, that you are committed to that vision, and I think it's a powerful message. So part of the process, you got an idea, everybody's thinking about it, you got some ideas, how do you get them implemented? One of the most very powerful ones is called an MVP. It's a minimum viable product. You have a working hypothesis, and underlying most working hypothesis is a nugget. It's a kernel of truth that has to be proven to be right or wrong because the whole hypothesis rests on it. And so what you want to do in an organization, you don't want to spend a whole lot of money building something that's costly, time-consuming, and may ultimately be proven to be ineffective. What you want to do is focus in on that kernel and say, how can we prove or disprove or learn more about the kernel of truth that underlies this working hypothesis? And that's the minimum viable product. And so, for example, in 2008, we talked about our online quoter. There was a lot of angst in the Florida market. Our hypothesis was that people were upset about insurance. The first thing they were going to do is go on the web at night. And in fact, our first hypothesis was most of the time people were going to get the news that they were canceled or non-renewed. And it was going to be after business hours, the agents are going to be closed, they're going to have angst. What are they going to do? They're going to go on the web. What do they want? They want to know, is insurance available, and is it available at a price that I can be comfortable with? And so we thought an online quoter was the way to go. But to build a full online quoter to give a real finite rate was beyond our means. So we said, all right, what are the couple factors that make the most difference in the rate to get an approximate rate? And we came up with 5 factors, and we put a simple rater on there. And that rater proved that we had 50,000 people a year come to that. And we started iterating. Today, you can get an instant quote, takes you less than 3 minutes. We are going out, we're geocoding the risk, we're bringing back pre-filled data. If the insured likes it, they can choose an agent, and the agent will have it actually in their workbench in the morning, so we're actually generating qualified leads for our agents. We wouldn't have built that in the beginning. What we had to build was something that said, will this work? The other thing that you find with an MVP is, it's not did it work or did it not work. It's really, if it works, how does it work? Because it's going to be different. You're going to learn things that you didn't know because you didn't think to ask or you didn't know how people would do things. For example, our online quoter. We started looking at the results and said a lot of people are not getting a quote. Why is that? Well, to get a quote, all you need is the address. You don't need city, state, and zip code, or it's the city and state. So we didn't put city, state on there. So people were putting city and state in the address. And when they did that, it couldn't geocode because it was an invalid entry. So there's all sorts of things you learn when you start experimenting. So you have objectives, you have a process to get those objectives, test them out, and bring them into production. And then the third thing is leadership. And this is a leadership conference, but and I'm not going to go too much into leadership because we could spend years on that, but how it affects the innovation. And what I keep coming back to, again, is Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great. He says there are 5 levels of leadership, 5 being the highest, 4 being the next highest. Now, when they did this study, they were trying to figure out how companies that they had talked about and built to last got to that state, because they were companies that were good, and then out of a cohort of companies, one would become great. What was the difference? And they were very rigorous and quantitative, but they had a bias against leadership as being a key factor in that. But because they were so quantitative, they ended up back and said, it is leadership, and the difference between level 4 and 5 leader is one thing. A level 5 leader has humility. Level 4 leader does not. Okay, and we're talking about the climate in your company. If you have arrogance, will kill thought. If it's all about me, and if it's all about my idea, do you think any members of our team are going to feel comfortable contributing? And my boss, our chairman and founder, I believe is a level 5 leader. Without his willingness to always be open to new ideas, no matter who brings them up, wanting always to be the best, we can't do all the things we're doing. You can't be any better than your leadership. At IAA, I think you've got a similar type of leader in John from what I've seen. So if that's true, then you know what I'm talking about. You can't get there if you don't have, if the guy on top is not going to be a level 5 leader, I believe you're going to have a very difficult time changing your culture. Leadership has to create a safe environment. When we're doing things, we expect failure. And it's not failure, it just doesn't work the way you thought it was going to work. That's not necessarily failure. That's why you're doing it, so that you can learn and you can say, okay, well, we just learned something, and then do it again. And then I think leadership has got to make tough decisions. I mean, you can have all the humility in the world, but somebody's got to make the tough decisions to keep focus and to make sure the organization is engaged and on track. One of the things that's really important for leadership is, again, back to the MVP. Because anytime you're going to do something, you have a whole host of opinions and ideas that are unproven. And we've worked on these online quoters, and everybody says, well, I would do it this way, I would do it that way, I think we ought to do this. It's real hard to get that discipline to say, look, this is the MVP, this is the minimum viable product that will test our hypothesis. All the rest of it doesn't matter today. And it's only leadership that can keep that on track. And going back to the innovation initiative, the chief innovation officer in the innovation department has got to be the senior leadership of the company. I don't think it's rocket science, but I think it's tremendously difficult to execute because you have to have all those components. And if you don't have the leadership, and if the leadership isn't committed, and even where you have great leadership now, I think you have to also then have a plan to say, I'm going to set these objectives, I know how to do this, I'm going to have a process by which we engage everybody in the organization. I thought it was interesting that Tim talked about communicating and building relationships throughout the organization. One of the reasons the main reason we're doubling in size right now in about a 2-year span is we changed our rating approach. And there are some innovations in there too, more complicated, but it was such a radical bet the farm type of strategy that we said, we don't know if this is going to work. If it works, we are going to grow like that. So we actually had a meeting. We had a series of meetings. Every single employee in the company, we talked to them about the strategy in small groups. Here's what we're doing. Here's why. Here's what we're seeing. Here's what we think could happen. Here's what might not happen. Give them a chance to ask questions and be part of that strategy. So when it did happen and they got the phone calls, they weren't wondering what we're doing. So the communication, I think, is really important. At John McNeil's last conference, he had a consultant there that had a lot of metrics, and he consulted companies on building themselves into innovative companies. And I asked him a question, and I said, if I'm an individual, how do I make a determination if I'm with the right company? If I want to innovate, if I want to be with the leader, if I want to be with the winner, and there's a lot of stuff about how you can start innovation in your company, but when is it a better idea just to move on, and when is it a good idea to try to be the innovator? And the guy was pretty good. He says, that's a really good question. Next question. But I think it's a question that we're all asking. And I think there's a flip side to that question too. If you're with a company that's doing these things, if you're innovating, if you're changing, if you feel like you're empowered and you're contributing, don't sell that short, because that's really, really hard to find. I've been with a lot of companies, and I had that in my first company, and I spent a lot of time looking for it again until I found it back at Security First. So I think that the evaluation there again is, if you look at your leadership and say, okay, are these guys, and go back to Tim, if these are guys that you should have a relationship with, are you going to follow them because they care about you and they want to do the best, or not? And if they're not, I don't think as an individual you can overcome poor leadership within a company to turn it around. I would say that on a lot of initiatives like change management, innovation management, they're surrogates for leadership getting involved and doing it. People aren't resistant to change, and they aren't resistant to innovation. If they're resistant to change, it's because in their heart of hearts, they don't believe that what they're being told makes sense for them or the business. Our employees love change. They love innovation. They love things that move the business forward. They like being winners. And I think that's just natural. So the winning team takes a strategy, takes hard work, committed leadership, and passion. You got to love what you do. You got to get up every day and say, we got a shot to do something nobody else has done before and do it better than anybody else. And I don't think there are any shortcuts or programs that's going to compensate for any of those being missing. So that is my summary.